Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. ADAC is proud to announce the launch of its education podcast entitled ADAC Answers. You can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. With that being said, let's jump right into it. Hi, and welcome to ADAC Answers, an education podcast for all. I'm your host, Erin Black. ADAC specializes in providing to private school leaders and teachers customized professional development programs to assist their schools with meeting individual student learning needs and increasing overall student achievement. Led and staffed by passionate, committed professionals, ADAC prides itself on delivering to its clients and the students and families whom its clients serve precise solutions to their unique education challenges. ADAC stands for Accountability, Delivery, Access, and Community, 4 words we believe epitomize our work. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and join us in listening to future episodes discussing all things education. Welcome back to another episode of ADAC Answers. Our guest speaker for today's episode is ADAC Vice President for Public School Leader and Teacher Development, Dr. Beth Fitzmaurice. Beth, thank you so much for being here with us today. If you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your current role and your journey in the world of education, then we'll jump right into our questions.
Sounds great. Thank you, Erin. Thanks for having me. I really am looking forward to spending time together. So my educational journey started non-traditionally. I was that student that wasn't built for school, but always found myself in a role of wanting to help others. So whether it was teaching swim lessons or CD at our church or something like that, I also was raised in a family where service was required and valued and considered an expected portion of being a contributing family member. We moved around a lot because my dad was in the Army, and wherever we landed, whether it was Kansas City or Ohio or Georgia or Kentucky or wherever, my mother always found something, some way for us to contribute to the community in one shape or form. She was an educator, so I naturally joined the family business and became an educator myself. After almost 35 years as a special educator or a special education leader, I call it fake retiring, and I had the great opportunity to join the fabulous folks at ADAC and start contributing in a little bit of a different way. And I'm loving every minute of it.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you. And I couldn't agree more with being raised with the impact of service in mind. My family was of the same mindset, and it really did set me on a different trajectory for my life. So I am a huge supporter of active community service, getting out there, really helping those in need, walking with people that may be marginalized, and really trying to make that human connection, because that's what it's all about. Can you share your journey from being in the United States Army to becoming an educational leader with over 30 years of experience in special education?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Like I said, I wasn't built for school. I always tested the limits and the patience of the educators around me. I've often joked that if it weren't for Sister Muriel and the good grace of our Lord, then I probably would have ended up in reform school. My dad said, Elizabeth, Sarah, you better join the Army. And so I did. And it was just the structure I needed at the time. And it really framed most of my adult educational journey in a really positive way, because the logic and the systems and the organizational structure in the military really spoke to me in a way that created some sort, I guess, logic for the education that I couldn't make sense of as a student myself. And so that sort of felt like a very natural connection to special education, really breaking things down, meeting people where they are, thinking about things from a logical perspective around who needs to know what, who needs to know how to do what, and how can people work together to make sure that everybody's their best so that we can support mission effectiveness. And in education, mission effectiveness is real evidence that students are learning and they're thriving and they're becoming really self-evolved contributors to our world.
I definitely think that structure and discipline are huge components to success. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL as we call it, is one of your research interests. Can you explain what UDL is and why it's important in today's educational landscape?
Sure. So we can talk about the textbook research definition, and then we can talk about real life and the true connection between students and educators and how everybody can work together to be their best selves. So we know that there's a lot of research around universal design for learning in the scope of neuroscience. So the neuroscience of learning really identifies that everybody's learning variability is as unique as our fingerprints, and no one person is alike. And universal design as an educational framework really embraces that variability as an asset and really looks at difference as something to be revered and appreciated and celebrated rather than fixed or remediated or marginalized in some way, whether purposeful or not. If we think about the education, we think about our world, right? And we know that every classroom, every school environment, every community, whether it's a neighborhood, a company, or even our church organization or our corporate organizations, they're all little ecosystems. And the value of an ecosystem is everything is different and contributes in a symbiotic way to create balance. And so I really think about universal design for learning like that. When we think about students who have learning variances or learn differently, we think about how those people are going to contribute to our world, often in jobs that we haven't even envisioned yet.
Right.
If every single person in the entire world was an accountant, how incredibly
boring.
No shade to those accountants out there, because they're important too. But that really is something to really think about. So if you think about, if you break down the neuroscience and the three principles of really thinking about how we engage in our learning environment and how the neuroplasticity of our brain really provides the opportunity for us to engage in learning. And then you think about representation. Do we see ourselves in our learning experience, whether it be culturally or learning variance wise or even interest area? Then that becomes a really important component of learning as well. And then finally, how we share what we know and how do we get to communicate with our world, whether it be our educators or our bosses or our customers or whatever component of life we're functioning in. How do we communicate what we know? Oftentimes it's not a paper pencil test. Right. I think I sat down for that dreaded 3-hour paper pencil test when I went to get my teaching license, and not again since. So oftentimes our students do that 8 times a year or 8 times over the course of the year. And that's a lot. And is that really the best way to figure out if kiddos know what they know? And the other piece about universal design for learning that I think is so incredibly interesting is that it really highlights, celebrates, and accentuates the relationship between educators and students and amongst one another, and then within the school community. Those relationships desperately matter. If a student feels seen, heard, and valued, and they have some agency, they're going to be more invested in their learning experience rather than just being compliant, right? The student in the classroom with agency really is the epitome of a value of an interactive world. I say all the time that learning is an interactive sport. It's not a passive sport where you just watch, or it's not a spectator sport. And so really helping to think about that. The other thing about universal design for learning that I really like is the whole idea that everyone does have that variance and that is a value. And if you ever watch Todd Rose's TED Talk about average.
I was just about to say, if the listeners haven't listened to Todd Rose's The Myth of Average TED Talk, you have to. I love it.
You have to. It's fantastic. Because there is no average. Whether you're a fighter pilot and there's no average size, or you're a learner in the classroom, or whatever the case may be, there is no average. So in the old days, when I went to teacher school back in the day, many few decades ago, we were taught to teach to the average and then tweak it up or down based on a few kiddos that were maybe quote unquote in the margins. Now we're talking about embracing those margins as a contribution to the classroom environment and the learning community as a whole. And so that really is very exciting. For listeners that want to actually delve more into the research, I encourage you to do. I can't tell you how many hours, days, weeks, months that I've lost just getting lost in the research and reading about that. CAST is a great place. The Center for Applied Special Technology, they have they're cutting edge on the research around in universal design for learning. And then there are a lot of other places too.
Thank you so much for those resources. You've mentioned multi-tiered systems of support as one of your research interests as well. How does MTSS benefit students, and what role does it play in creating more inclusive classrooms?
That's a very good question. And we know that multi-tiered systems of support are codified in the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. And so it's the law of the land in our nation. And in universal design for learning is heavily endorsed, not only because we're supposed to, but because it's the right thing to do. I like to think of multi-tiered system of support the way I think of one of my favorite pastimes, and that's those organization shows. And whatever the case may be, right? I follow too many to keep track of all of them. But it's really about taking stock of what you have and what you're good at and what you need, and then packaging it in a way that is as logical as possible and makes it the most efficient to use.
Right.
So you go into these fabulous professionals go into someone's kitchen, and there's stuff everywhere, and nobody knows where anything is. And they pull it all out. They make some decisions about what are the best things and the most important things to that particular family. And then they reorganize the kitchen in a way that flows,
right,
and in a way that is really efficient, and in a way that really meets the needs of all learners. And so thinking about creating a tiered system of support, it's the same thing. Every school has different resources, and every school has different opportunities, and every school has different needs. So it's important for the leadership and some key personnel in each of those schools to come together and take stock of what their assets are and what their resources are, and build their own toolkit, and then cultivate a data collection system around those supports so that they'll know if what they decide to try on with kiddos to help them over different challenges are really working. And then finally, I'll say about MTSS is I have a lot of schools that call me and say, can you help me with MTSS? And I say, sure. And I say, what are you hoping to accomplish? And they say, we really need to work hard on our tier 3 supports. And I say, that's great. And we'll get there. I would say that because you think about the tiered supports as a pyramid, and the bottom pyramid is that tier 1 universally designed instruction, 80% of the kiddos live there without ever needing anything extra. We should be spending at least 80% of our time cultivating really valuable, comprehensive continuum of instructional practices within that tier 1. And then spend a little time thinking about some tier 2 supports that will benefit and augment what's happening in the classroom as a supplemental support. And then finally, for those few kiddos that really need that individual targeted support, then you have the bandwidth to do that, because you're not overwhelmed by thinking about what kinds of tier 3 supports could possibly be needed in an entire school. Because you're not then worried about the entire school anymore.
Right, exactly. Yes. And when I was a teacher, just an example of how small situations can really have a large impact. I had a group of 5 students that were constantly interrupting instruction by blurting out during religion. And another teacher taught religion for all of our K through 4 classrooms. And so I sat there and I would mark down how many times that they shouted out or blurted out. And then I gathered all of them and we did a social story, and then we talked about their behaviors. And I was able to say, hey, within a 30-minute class, you blurted out 17 times and 2 of them were on topic. Let's set a goal for us to try to have a gradual release of responsibility onto you instead of me taking that data, but then also recognizing exactly what's happening. When I'm not just saying stop blurting out and you're like, I don't blurt out, or maybe I blurted out once. You have concrete evidence of what's going on. So then 4 out of the 5 responded to that and we didn't have any issues. Then 1 didn't. And we did a more intensive intervention, but same with the tally marks and everything, but we were very specific about our goals. And it was like, okay, today I'm going to try to have less than 7 blurts or interruptions. And we really took it slowly and made these goals until he was like, I don't want you to do that anymore. I can do it. And then super proud of himself at the end of it when he was able to, but then we could move him back down into tier 1. It's not just that once they're in tier 2 or tier 3, that they're there forever, that it's fluid, and that tier 2 instruction, you don't have to be fearful of that either, because like I just had 1 or 2 sessions with the kiddos and a social story, and we talked about their the data, and then they were right back into tier 1. So it's not always this long process or a whole lot of work on the teacher. So
you're right. And you know what, Erin, I love about the example you just gave in the story you just told about your own experience, not only that you were able to help them, which doesn't surprise me at all, but that you really illuminated so nicely the intersection between the 3 domains of MTSS, and that academic and the social emotional and then the behavior. And knowing that we're dealing with whole children that don't leave portions of themselves at the threshold of the classroom. And so really thinking about how emotional, behavioral, and academic skills can be developed in unison and addressed in a way that does create opportunities for success and preserve dignity for students. And then that becomes a measure of productivity for students.
Definitely.
The last thing I'd love to say about MTSS, if you don't mind, before we move on, is really about the need in our world, especially in our in education today, the difference often of culture between educators and children, and that we want to be really cautious to have an intentional focus of being culturally affirming to our students who have different backgrounds or different upbringings than us, and to make sure that we're not expecting our BIPOC students to fit into our paradigm based on the way we were raised, and thinking about it from that perspective. And I'll say the strongest measure of information gathering in that endeavor really is about talking to students, and really about asking kiddos and creating safe spaces for students to talk about what they need to be successful. Because usually the most disruptive student, or the student who's struggling with a learning difference, the person that's most aware of that is them.
Exactly. That is 100% true. I could not agree more. Inclusive practices are a significant focus of your work. What are some practical strategies educators can implement to create more inclusive learning environments for all students?
Yeah, great question. We live in an inclusive world. The world of education is one of the only places right now in our modern society where we see different places for different types of learners, right? When you think about the accomplishments that Dell Technologies is creating for students with learning differences, or you think about some of the other places that are really creating opportunities for people who learn differently, or celebrating that, and the different opportunities in biotech or in the technology field, and really remembering that our students all have hopes and dreams. And I often say that faith knows no bounds of cognition, and neither does ambition. And really meeting students where they are and looking at those differences as an asset. I remember when I was teaching middle school, and it was early on in when Character Education Initiative came to fruition with President Bush, the second one. And I remember really people thinking about how we were going to do that as a graduation requirement, and were we going to create a character education graduation requirement. And you get the school board meeting, and one of the school board members, meaning well, turned to me and said, "Oh, but of course I don't mean your kids." And I said, yeah, I'm a little bit of a sparky person sometimes. And so I said, "You mean my own children, or the students that I have the privilege of teaching?" And that a pin drop. And so then I said, "I really would like to respectfully challenge the perspective." I said, because what I'll say is every single human being has something to contribute to our world. And I believe that if we really honor people's differences as assets, or as a blessing, or as a strength, then we can find ways that everyone can contribute, and everybody has something to learn from everybody. And really thinking about education as the great equalizer, and the place where all people can grow and flourish. And that person not only helped me create opportunities for students, but then gave a public apology, and then was the largest champion for inclusion in that district. So it was really a little bit of a risk to be that that sparkly on TV at a school committee meeting, but it all worked out well in the end.
Yeah.
Don't anybody go looking for that tape.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I used to refer to my students that would struggle with self-esteem because of a diagnosis. I'd refer to them as their superpowers. I was like, look, I have them too, and they have been my superpowers throughout my entire life because I see the world differently. I process the world differently, and it's a gift. I think, yeah, it's just opening yourself up to really see the value of every single human being and understanding that our differences make us beautiful, and we should be celebrating that for sure.
Exactly.
Could you share an example of a particularly challenging situation you faced in your educational career and how you've managed to overcome it?
Sure. So once you become a school or district leader, sometimes the challenges find you. And oftentimes I found in those roles, the challenge was that distraction from the important work of teaching and learning. And so it was really important I had a great mentor that helped me build those skills. To really, I'm still working on building them, by the way, but it's a lifelong pursuit to be able to create some sorts of guardrails to some of the things that distract from teaching and learning so you can stay focused on the needs of students and the learning opportunities available to students. But I want to tell you a story about my classroom teaching experience. And I know that this was one of my very first really trying experiences as an educator. And that was the time that I became keenly aware of the needs of the students in my classroom. And I was finding one policy barrier after another when I was trying to think about ways that we could meet their needs. And one in particular was the policy that every educator had to offer an hour and a half, 90-minute after school extra help session. Didn't have a problem with the time. I had no worries about spending time with students, but the students in my class weren't coming to school for after help. They weren't benefiting from that kind of an instructional experience.
Yep.
And I wanted to do home visits because one of the things we were working on was self-care and life skills.
Yeah.
And I knew that carryover and that generalization wasn't going to happen without direct instruction. And it took probably about a year before I was able to gain permissions to actually do home visits in lieu of after school help. I said, I'll do it. And I actually ended up, once it was all said and done, ended up doing more than just the one day because we had more students, but just being able to work through that process and go to students' homes and then have their families see me working with them. And then that's just the beauty of inclusive education. When special educators come into the classroom and they work with classroom teachers, when I get to go into homes and I work with parents, then there's that continuity and there's that natural collaboration that really yields such positive results. But I remember spending a little bit of time with my own little pity party that I was a little bit frustrated about some of the policy barriers that were in place. And then ultimately I ended up finding some really good allies and was able to make some forward progress, but it didn't happen overnight.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. As the Vice President for Public School Leader and Teacher Development, what are your primary goals and initiatives to support the professional growth of teachers and school leaders?
Great question. Teachers become teachers because they want to help students learn. School leaders become leaders because leaders are teachers that want to help teachers do better. and then the beat goes on. And that's sort of the circle of life from in education. And I loved every step of that path in my lifetime. And now at ADAC, I am looking forward to continuing to help leaders and help teachers do the hard work that they need to do in order to meet the needs of students and continue to really help folks take that deep breath, treat themselves with grace, and think about those differences and those challenges as an opportunity and for growth and an opportunity to make the difference in a student's life and really relationships. We try as a team at ADAC to stay current on newest research and newest developments so that we can bring those to teachers that nary have time to correct papers or get through to the day, and bring some of those in a really safe team nurturing instructional coaching a relationship so that they can be the best they can be for and still continue to fill their cup.
And that's huge. I think that ongoing education or continuing education is huge. And as an educator, I think it's really important to always keep current and trying to, you don't have to adopt everything, but
Right.
just making sure that you understand the research that goes into what it takes to learn in today's world and what students need.
Absolutely.
What do you see as the biggest challenge facing educators and educational leaders today? And how do you believe these challenges can be addressed?
Yeah, that's a great question because education is nothing like it was when we were kids.
Right.
I think it's a really hard time to be a student.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really hard time to be an educator.
Yeah.
We live in a really cantankerous and divisive world a lot of times, and a lot of students have a lot of questions. And a lot of teachers feel really, I've experienced teachers sharing with me, sometimes I don't know what to say. I'm not supposed to tell people, I know I'm not supposed to share my political views and my opinions. I'm supposed to help create opportunities for for students to learn how to think on their own.
Right.
And they're asking very pointed questions, and I don't even know if I have the answers to those. Right. And so really helping educators navigate this world, it really, I think it takes educators and leaders really being vulnerable and honest with one another and sharing their concerns and being open to having those conversations and partnering on making a difference in the classroom. And educators have a lot on their plates too. I had a mentor one time that drew 3 circles like a Venn diagram and said curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And he said, as a superintendent, every task I have, I try to fit into this, and I permit myself 7 to 10% of tasks outside of this circle. And I thought, oh my gosh, how do you ever accomplish that? He says, oh, there are a lot of people that are not happy with me on the regular. And I know that at least 90 to 93% of my day is spent on meeting the needs of students, which means meeting the needs of my school leaders, which means them. And then I'm asking them to do the same to meet the needs of teachers, so teachers can do the same and meet the needs of students. Right. And sometimes it's a really edgy philosophy, and it can cause some consternation. But if we're doing everything we possibly can for student benefit, then that's the strongest justification any leader or any educator can ever ask for.
100%. I totally agree. Last episode, we talked with a friend of mine, Jacob Knazer. He's the principal of a high school, and he said everything goes back to mission. It's not hard for me to make a decision because it either aligns with the mission or it doesn't. And so I love that, taking that exact same mentality, but breaking it down into your roles and responsibilities and ensuring that you are doing everything with that at the very center. I think that's huge. With your experience teaching at the United States Military Academy at West Point, what unique insights or lessons did you gain from working in that environment that have influenced your approach to education?
So I appreciate that question because I think there are so many similarities, and there are some comical ones that we'll laugh about in a second, but really about those systems and structures and having those firm goals and understanding that flexible means is the way to get that accomplished, right? So when we write, if we're thinking about a military strategy and we think about what our goal is, and we think about plan A, there's always a couple of contingency plans in this in the queue just in case. Same thing with education. We know what we want our students to learn. If we're really embracing universal design for learning, then we're really embracing students taking multiple pathways to accomplish that. Right. And it doesn't mean that there's no structure in the classroom and that there are no rubrics or anything like that. Actually, when you create flexible pathways to accomplish your work and share your knowledge, you're increasing the rigor and the expectations in the classroom. And that's the same thing in the military, right? If every single person in that entire unit knows what that mission is and they're dedicated to that mission, you're going to get more accomplished. And if I'm being completely honest, one of the measures of success when I was at West Point was organized chaos.
Yes.
And I was in a 2nd grade classroom, and this educator was, with serenity and grace, navigating 30 2nd graders. And I just looked at her and I thought, oh my word, you are amazing. And how talented you are that you can accomplish this. And everybody's learning something. And afterwards we were talking, she said, that was a mess. And I said, that was organized chaos. Every single student I spoke to knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing, and they could tell me why they were doing it. And you don't get better than that, right? because that's where that true investment in learning comes. So organized chaos, the battlefield, or second grade, they're both pretty similar.
I love it. I was in second grade for 5 years. I absolutely love it. But yeah, we were organized chaos. Absolutely wild in there, but so much fun. Can you discuss any ongoing or upcoming projects or research that you're particularly excited about in the realm of education and special education?
Yes, I believe that a couple of things. I'm trying to destigmatize UDL as a special education intervention, right?
Yes.
And so we've taken great pains at ADAC to organize our website so that it fits squarely under teaching and learning as an instructional methodology, not under special education. But one of the things that I believe, and I was listening to one of your podcasts recently with Dr. Drummy and Christy Medeiros about falling in love with teaching again. And it really struck me, the best thoughts come when you're running, that UDL can really be a vehicle to help teachers and leaders fall in love with teaching again, fall in love with education again. When we think about the sort of intimate connection of learning and trust and vulnerability, and how many little kids have occasionally called their teacher mom,
right?
And really that level of trust in the classroom. And if we are really helping people think about what children need or how they learn, and celebrating those variances in learning and removing barriers to access so that everybody can be their best selves, then we're creating an incredibly valuable, an incredibly healthy ecosystem, back to the beginning of our conversation. And everybody wants to go to work when they're in a healthy ecosystem, because it's fun, and you're successful, and productivity is happening, and creativity is happening, and children are happy, families are happy. And so everybody wants to go to a job that has a healthy ecosystem. So would we not want to strive for that? And I would argue, and I would suggest, based on my research, that universal design for learning can absolutely be the vehicle to create that opportunity.
Yes, I totally agree. In closing, what advice or words of wisdom would you like to share with our audience, especially those considering a career in education or educational leadership?
Advice, huh? From somebody with such a crooked path. I would say, as educators, we have to trust our students and trust our gut. And as leaders, we need to protect our educators.
Yeah.
And that relationships matter. Relationships with amongst the faculty and the adults. And I don't mean sharing recipes and going to talking about youth soccer, talking about topics. I'm talking about real, respectful, collegial relationships where you're really talking about teaching and learning and sharing things and offering your best to each other and things like that. And then I guess, because when folks are really collegial, then you know what, they're part of the solution. Right. And there's agency there for leaders, there's agency there for staff, for teachers, for paraprofessionals, for support staff. There's agency there for students and even families. And that just really having some locus of control over yourself as a human being in our world is just one of the most powerful experiences. And if you can, in a healthy way, do that in your school environment, then you're winning. And finally, last of all, the very most important piece of advice I always give to anyone, and I said it to all my kids before they went to some major high pressure sporting event or something like that, I'd be like, go have some fun. Yeah. Yes, that is missed all the time, and it is the simplest thing. Yes, just go have some fun. Yeah, I totally agree, and I totally agree with you on relationships matter. It's huge, building authentic relationships with your students, with your colleagues, with your leadership. It really does change the game, but especially with your students and their families, to really build that inclusive environment. But we all remember how people make us feel. And if you can make a child feel like you are genuinely interested in who they are as a person, not just because you have to check some box, I guarantee you're going to see results that you didn't even know were possible, both behaviorally and academically. So absolutely you're spot on, Erin. Thanks. True.
It was so lovely having you on the show today, Beth. Thank you so much for being on ADAC Answers with us and sharing all of your expertise and your thoughts and funny stories. I really appreciate it. And we have to have you on again soon.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Erin. This has been a joy. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a fabulous afternoon.
Thank you. You as well.
Take good care.
To everyone at home, if you have any follow-up questions you would like to see addressed in a future episode, or if you want to share your thoughts on today's topic, then please submit them to us on social media using the hashtag ADAC Answers. If you would like to hear future ADAC Answers episodes, then please follow and subscribe. And if you're interested in finding out more about our company and the services we offer, please visit us on our website at www.theadac.com. That is THEADAC.com. Thank you so much for listening to our episode today, and we look forward to you tuning in to our next episode. Again, thank you to all of our listeners from the ADAC team. We'll see you next time.